Hey, what is up YouTube? Kolst here. So a lot of changes have been happening to the arena lately, and we've gotten to see the full impact of kind of how a lot of these changes have affected the balance of arena. So I figured it'd be time to make another update to the tier list for arena. Just so you, this is where the tier list was as of a few weeks ago. And the changes I'm mainly talking about here are the changes that came from 23.4.2, which were the last micro adjust, the major micro adjust, and 23.4.3, there were some balance changes as well. And by the way, since these are coming out a lot more often now, if you want to make sure you're always watching the most recent version of these, you can always go to my YouTube channel, obviously click the subscribe button and hit the bell to always be notified when I make a new video. But also I have this playlist for meta insights where all my tier list updates and balance update videos are going to be, so you can always make sure you're looking at the most recent one here. But with that, let's review just really quickly what these changes were. The big changes for arena here, the major one here was that they made some commons, as they said, some neutral cards as rare as epics. They increased the rarity, so we'll look at exactly how much they did that. They did a general balance adjustment, just influencing the win rates of classes by varying how much of their good cards they get. And in 23.4.3 there were a couple balance changes, mainly the one to Tidal Revenant, I guess the one to Nelly as well, and the one to Balworn Vanguard. Those are the big ones for arena. So we'll talk first about exactly what happened to these common cards, which cards they influence the rates of. So if you look at the appearance rates here, you can see, most commons look like commons, but there's a few glaring outliers. Mothership, which was a rare, was previously showing up slightly more rare than a rare, is now showing up like an epic. Knight Captain is showing up like an epic. Scorpid is actually showing up like a rare. Twin Tyrant is showing up like an epic. And Gangplank Diver is looking like an epic. So if you've been playing Arena the last couple weeks, you might have noticed that these cards are much less common, and this is the reason why. They simply don't show up as much. The funny thing is that the win rate of Knight Captain, I think, was actually helped by this, because now people aren't playing around it, but that's a topic for another video. But now I just want to point out, the funny thing is that if you're facing a class with a good Colossal, like Paladin for instance, you can see that you are more likely to get hit by the Leviathan from deck than any of these cards individually, so just, kind of funny. But with that, let's just jump back to the balance. So this is where the tier list looked like before 23.4.2 when the balance changes happened. And as a refresher, what they said is that they increased the rates of Priest, Hunter, Demon Hunter, Druid, and Mage, and they nerfed Shaman, Paladin, and Rogue. And so I'll talk about some of these other balance changes when the class comes up, but let's just jump right into the tier list, and at the end we'll be able to compare this to see exactly how much things are different now. So I'm just going to go top to bottom here. The first class I'm going to put in the top tier here is actually Hunter. So Hunter, I believe, is actually the most flexible class right now. You can do basically any strategy. Hunter was one of the classes that was buffed, and the way that they buffed Hunter specifically was that they made Primordial Explorers show up like candy, basically. So you get all of these Dragon Discoveries. They also have just all these other things going for it. One of the best taunts ever made. Bunch of Discover, bunch of ways to cheat mana, get a bunch of rushes and stuff. And they're still a Hunter, and you have Piercing Shot and Aim Shot both in, and Quick Shot as well, by the way. So they can do literally anything. So the diversity of experience even drafting Hunter is much, much greater than other classes. And it also means when you're facing a Hunter, you have absolutely no idea what you're up against. So yeah, Hunter just very, very strong right now. The other class I'm going to be putting at this top tier is Warlock. So Warlock was actually very good even before the adjustments, and it was not adjusted, but essentially Warlock moves up just because everyone that was above it got nerfed. Warlock, just to review again, just has like a whole bunch of really good tempo cards. They also have a legitimate chance, since the curse package did get buffed, you can actually make curses somewhat work. But in general, Warlocks just want to take the board, and of course you have the benefit of life tap so that you won't run out of cards. So Warlock overall, not nearly as flexible as Hunter, but you have a lot of things going for you as well, putting Warlock into this top tier. So with that, let's move on to the second tier. Now these classes can also be very, very good. Really any class can be good because deck variance is very, very high right now. But these classes are just a bit less consistent than the top. So the first one I'll put here is Warrior. So Warrior was actually also not adjusted, but the one change that did negatively impact Warrior was this last balance patch where several of their cards were nerfed. And even though it was possibly the smallest nerf on this page, the biggest one impacting Arena was Tidal Revenant, just losing 3 armor gain. And I've played with Warrior, and this actually was a much more significant nerf, I think, than I would have even predicted. It really makes a difference a lot of the time. And the reason this is such a big one for Arena is because Warrior had previously been buffed, and one of the ways it was buffed was making cards like Tidal Revenant also given out like candy, as well as Evil Quartermaster, Trident, Lava Gorger. And there are some relevant armor synergies, so that's part of the reason why this was actually a much bigger deal. Normally armor stuff doesn't really matter in Arena, but it matters a lot more now than it usually does. As well as just for staying alive, because Warrior is essentially the most consistent control class right now. You can of course still play tempo, but if you're gonna want to play control, you probably want to do it with Warrior. So overall, Warrior definitely a good class, but what does seem to happen is a lot of times you will get bullied by some of the better tempo classes, and you just get knocked a little bit too hard off board. But if you have all the pieces, you might just have the armor to survive anyway. So the next class we're going to talk about in this tier is Mage. So Mage was a class that was buffed, and basically the way they were buffed is they got an increased offering rate on a whole bunch of their random cards. So Mage can actually be played very well as a aggressive tempo class. You do have Fireball and Pyroblast both in the game to finish off your opponents. But also you can just high roll a bunch of randomness and then, go infinite value generation as well, making Mage a rather flexible class. I haven't gotten to play with it much, but good mages are very hard to beat right now. The issue is I think that they have the highest variance both in individual games just based off what spells you happen to get discovered. There are a lot of bad mage spells as well, so spell discovery isn't the most consistent, and also you can just get kind of trolled in the draft, making Mage just a very high variance experience. Good mages are probably the best decks in the game, but also bad mages are just not exciting. So overall, we're going to put them in the great tier. The next class in this great tier now is Paladin. So Paladin was one of the top classes previously, and it was a nerf. Not as hard as Shaman, which we haven't talked about yet. But unlike Hunter, for example, which gets their Explorer thrown out like candy, Paladin does not. We have to scroll down here to even find Bronze Explorer. It's actually much rarer than, a lot of the other Explorers now. But Paladin still has just a lot of really good cards. It's just that the rates of them aren't very high. So you can get very lucky with Paladin, but also you can kind of just get a bad deck. And bad Paladins that are completely off board and don't have comebacks don't tend to do very well, especially against some of these really good tempo classes like Warlock and Hunter. So Paladin, kind of like Mage, just kind of hit or miss. So with that, let's move on to the middle tier, the classes that you don't really want, but you'll be kind of okay picking. There are going to be 2 here. The first class here will be Druid. So Druid in the last couple months has been nerfed multiple times. It spent a lot of time at the top, and they did buff it here, but they did not buff Druid by very much. They've had a lot of cards like Scale Vinixia, Flipper Friends that used to be super common, and I can't even find them on this list. They're not very common anymore. But what they did do is that they made Emerald Explorer very common. You see a lot of that. So basically, if you get a high roll deck, you can either, try to have infinite value just through dragons, but probably the more consistent way to play Druid is to essentially build it as an aggro deck, and if you happen to get dragons just for a backup option, that's nice, but otherwise you just want to try to, go wide, board buff, that kind of stuff. Kind of typical Druid Arena things. With that, the next class in this decent tier, the only other class here is Rogue. So Rogue, along with Mage, is kind of the ultimate random class. You see, like, if all their top 4 cards here are super random. And there are others as you look further down as well. And specifically, a lot of the ways you win with Rogue are often to generate things that your class isn't actually able to draft via, Reconnaissance or Burglar or Violet Haze or Jackpot. So Rogue, of course, again, always has pretty good tempo options. You can play it as tempo as well, but most people, if they pick Rogue, they're going to play into the random as hard as possible because you kind of have to. Overall, Rogue is very inconsistent. You're going to have some of the most crushing victories, but also you're going to get completely dominated sometimes. Rogue's just one of those things. So with that, we'll move on to the playable tier. Now, there's only 3 classes left, so generally you're never going to be forced to take these classes unless they're all against each other, but the first one we're going to put here is Demon Hunter. I have seen some very good Demon Hunter decks that are basically just like constructed level aggro decks, but most of the time you're not going to get that. If you look at Demon Hunter list, Demon Hunter was buffed, but they were very timid in buffing Demon Hunter because they've also had problems with Demon Hunter being too strong. Basically what it seems like happened is they just got Bone Glaive back. Bone Glaive had an offering penalty for a while, but now it doesn't. Otherwise it doesn't seem like they really helped Demon Hunter at all. Oh, and also for Demon Hunter, the nerf to Battle Worn Vanguard. Since you are kind of forced to play tempo, this was a huge nerf, because this is one of the best ways you would roll over somebody in tempo, and now it's just much less likely to work. So this is why it still stays at this low of a tier. But yeah, Demon Hunter still does have a lot of good tempo, so if you get forced to pick Demon Hunter, just try to be as good of a tempo deck as possible and hope for the best. And the other class we're going to put into this tier is Shaman. Shaman was the top class before that last adjustment, but they hit Shaman really hard, as they kind of said they would, because even though Shaman wasn't that much higher than Paladin, Matt London specifically singled it out as an outlier, so this was kind of a hint that this would happen. So a lot of their top cards, like Schooling, used to be like 45%, I think. There are just a few of these really good cards. Fire Elemental, I think, was higher, I'm not sure, but yeah, there's a lot of cards they just don't see a lot of anymore. Shaman, kind of like Paladin, if you don't have a great Shaman deck, you're gonna have a tough time against any class that has good tempo. And so they just hit Shaman really hard, kind of knocking them out of the meta entirely. And with that, let's talk about the last class, which is Poor Priest. So Priest actually was a class, funny enough, that Matt London actually did single out as a bad class, but they still didn't buff Priest enough to actually make it good. And I certainly don't mind this, but yeah, if you look at Priest, like, it's one of the only classes that doesn't actually have a single card above 40% offering rate in decks. Part of that might be because, again, they just don't have that many dominant cards. It's possible you see more Holy Novas and Shower Dust, but you just don't always take them because some of these cards arguably are worse than some of the top neutrals, so you probably just don't always take them. And yeah, I kind of imagine Priest might just need a rotation to be good, because unless they really buff the offering rates, Priest just doesn't have really the card quality to match up with all the other classes, frankly. But, you know, imagine Explorers get rotated out and Draconic Studies gets rotated in or something. That would be the kind of situation that maybe Priest gets better, but as is, it's probably just not happening for this rotation. If you like Priest, just wait until the next meta, basically. And so overall, we can look at the old and new tier list side by side here. You can see a lot of movement here. Interesting, some of the classes that didn't move. Warrior, Druid, Demon Hunter, Priest stayed basically the same, but everything else moved around pretty significantly. And so overall, I think these were pretty good adjustments. The meta definitely shifted more towards the tempo direction, which I personally like, and just a lot of new classes getting moved around, so pretty cool overall. But with that, I think that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for hanging out, everyone. Appreciate all your support as always. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and comment on all these things for the almighty algorithm. I'll probably be going live on Twitch around when I upload this video, so definitely come and hang out if you choose so. But yeah, thanks a lot again. We'll see you guys in the next one.